Hello, it's Wednesday night. Garland Nixon here, and we're going to talk about the Ukraine situation. But this time, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to talk about what happens after Ukraine. And in order to talk about what happens after Ukraine, we have to figure out how we got here in the first place. Let's talk. Hello, just putting my stuff up on Rockfin so that put my stuff up so that all of my friends on over on Twitter could see that I'm on the air on rockfin.com/Garland Nixon. Make sure you go there and join and become a subscriber. And you can be a member if you want for $9.99. Certainly appreciate that. And you can do tips on Rockfin and certainly appreciate that too. Here you can do super chats. All right. Something that needs to be talked about. We need to revisit something. We need to revisit how we got here because there's a question. Everybody's like, what are the Russians are going to do next? One of the things that we get a lot, let me adjust my camera. One of the things that we get a lot is the Russians aren't going they're not reaching their goals. They're not accomplishing. And it kind of usually works something like this. The Russians want to take such and such city next. Now, we've never heard the Russians say they want to take such and such city. They want to take Kiev, and then they get rid of their troops. Aha! They wanted to take Kiev, but they weren't successful. They were unable to take Kiev. So they failed, right? So the discussion, hey, chicken patty, the discussion is usually set up some arbitrary goal or benchmark that you say the Russians want to meet. And then after you separate that arbitrary benchmark or goal, then you say they didn't meet it. And there you go. You've got a victory in the, shall we say, social media, in the public relations sphere. You have created a victory for yourself. My adversary wants to do X. Well, you just made that up. Your adversary didn't tell you that. And then your adversary doesn't reach that particular goal because you made it up. And then you say they didn't reach it, so therefore they haven't been successful. That sounds good, but that doesn't do you any good on that battlefield. Meanwhile, to be quite frank, I haven't read much from the Russians of what their battle plan is. Hey, Russians, what city you want to take next? They're just going to be doing what they're doing, and they ain't going to tell you. They're not going to give you a hint as opposed to what they're going to do next. And I think that's part of the Russian way of doing war. They're mum. They don't even tell the people at home what's going on the battlefield. They're very quiet when it comes to that. But here's your question. Here's my question. Here's the question. What, in the event that this thing is over, right? Or let's add this. At some point, we've heard Henry Kissinger recently say we need to, Ukraine needs to give the Russians, be ready to give up some land and to come to an agreement. Well, here's the question. Is Ukraine going to be able to do anything other than give up land, or can they stop the Russians? It's funny because there was an article. Let me see if I can find it. It was actually an RT. And what it said was, yes, here we go. Let's look at this. I got to share this with you. You're going to find this funny. Let me share it. So basically what it was about was that Henry Kissinger has come out and said and I'm getting somewhere, so don't think I'm not going, that I'm so ADD that I don't know where I'm going, but this is all part of it. So Henry Kissinger apparently came out and said that he thinks that within the next 2 months, the West and Ukraine should be ready to give up some ground to the Russians to say, okay, the Russians, you're going to take such and such ground out from Ukraine and come to an agreement. And here's what's happened. Look at this. Ukrainian presidential advisor Alexei Arestovich, resorted to obscene language to criticize those in the West, urging Kiev to cede part of the country's territory to Russia. Go F yourselves with such proposals, you dumb Fs. To trade Ukrainian territory a little bit? Are you effing crazy? Our children are dying. Soldiers are stopping shells with their bodies, and they're telling us how to sacrifice our territories. This will never happen. He criticized the logic of bleeding voices, encouraging Ukraine to curb its appetite and to give Russia the territories. And he says another advisor of Ukrainian, whatever this guy's name, took to address pro-Russian lobbyists in Europe. We do not sell our citizens' territories or sovereignty. This is a clear red line. Ukrainian society has paid a terrible price and will not allow anyone to even take a step in that direction. No government, no country. Anyone that calls for such compromises will get a principled response from Kiev. So here's the thought. I mean, if we really think about this, as Russia day by day takes town after town, city after city, what they say is, we'll never get, you're out of your mind, go F yourself. So what does that tell you? You're not dealing with sane people. You're not dealing with rational people. They're not rational actors. I mean, you're losing. And you're like, hey, we're giving up. But here's what happens. You can only blame the PR machine from the CIA, because as the CIA and MI6 PR machine says, they're winning, they're winning, they're winning. And these idiots are like, yeah, we're winning. We're not giving anything up to the Russians whatsoever. Meanwhile, they're like soldiers are like throwing their hands up, coming out of Azovstal with white flags, getting turned into mincemeat with Russian artillery. I mean, thousands of people are dying here, for God's sake. And these idiots are like, hey, tell you what, we're not giving up anything. You ought to be out of your mind. We're not giving up any land. No, you know what? Let's be quite frank. You're not giving up any land to the Russians. They're taking it. They're not asking for it. They're taking it. But that brings something else to mind before this goes any further. And all this is part of where we're going after this, right? He says the Ukrainians defended Kiev. The Russians never attacked Kiev. Liberated 3 regions and are completely liberating the 4th. They're liberating regions. Okay, all righty. Fine. Today, the same people offer us to give Russia the East and South. Thanks for the advice, but we'll probably take up arms. He ain't taking up arms. That guy's sitting in Kiev having a hot meal every day, talking bull crap, while the guys that are taking up arms are out catching artillery every day, getting blown to pieces, losing entire battalions. So hey, I guess that's big talk for that guy. And of course, statements from Arestovich and Podiak come after former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger spoke. And he basically urged Ukraine to make peace quickly, seek a return to the way things were before February. Well, first of all, them days are gone and they ain't coming back. Okay, so you see that called saner heads, and God knows how far is your country gone and how mad is your country when the guy in the room who is the sanest, who's the sage, who's the foreign policy realist is Henry Kissinger. The man's a psychotic mass genocide murderer, and now he has better foreign policy chops than the Biden administration's entire team. Sad state of affairs, wouldn't you say? Okay, so let's keep going. So what is my point? My point is, it is fairly obvious at this point that the Russians are, they're like, yeah, whatever. Because in fact, let me find another one. There was somewhat of a Russian response to all of this talk. Let me find it. Okay, and I'll share that with you. There was a bit of a Russian response to Henry Kissinger and everything and everybody else. And that response was this. Russia won't just grasp any proposal on Ukraine. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova, she's a pretty woman, isn't she? She's very, very beautiful woman. Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova called Italy's peace settlement plan for Ukraine an example of armchair theorizing. Those who think Russia will grasp any Western proposal for peace settlement do not understand anything about the current situation. Right? That's what she says. And that's what we're going to get into today. That's exactly what I was thinking. During a briefing, Zarakova said it's impossible to believe, but Moscow has so far not received any proposals from Rome. Therefore, she could only discuss the media reports. Looking at these reports, she said, the proposals seem so divorced from reality that it's difficult to take them serious. It's a curious idea that Moscow could be interested in peace initiatives that prioritize the logic of further tightening sanctions against the Russian Federation and continuing military support for the Kiev regime. She says, it's impossible to supply neo-Nazis in Ukraine with weapons on one hand and come up with plans to save the situation on the other hand, right? And she goes on to say, perhaps they assume the Russian side will grab any Western proposal, no matter how absurd it may be. But in this case, they basically do not understand anything at all about the current situation. She did say the appearance of proposals could show that Rome is perhaps beginning to think about the depressing consequences of the military psychosis that was caused by the reaction of the West to the special military operation in Ukraine. Okay, and she said, now listen to this. And the supposed plan could be an attempt to offer some alternatives to the current escalation, which threatens to develop into a full-scale military conflict between Russia and NATO. You notice that she said that. That's something I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about. She's saying this is threatening to turn into a basically World War III. It's interesting because I read a report today that said that Olaf Scholz, the prime minister of Germany, said he's not going to be Kaiser Wilhelm. In other words, he's not going to be the person who starts World War III. You know, World War I was Kaiser Wilhelm. So he says, I'm not going to be the person who starts World War III. Basically, he's saying, I'm not going to be dragged into a war. And with Russia, that's what he's saying. Wisely so, because Germany doesn't have much of a military right now. I think if they trust me, they don't want to get in a war with Russia. They got a couple guys laying around with slingshots and blowguns. Right? I mean, literally. The truth of the matter is that France has somewhat of an army. Germany, the UK, the rumor that the joke about UK is that you could fit their whole military into a soccer stadium. These countries have allowed their military to deteriorate into nothing. So basically, the NATO is basically the U.S. government's military. That's pretty much it. And the truth is, all the NATO mostly has in Western Europe and Eastern Europe is light armored divisions. They don't really have anything there that could go, that's ready to go to, they are not ready to go to war with Russia by any stretch of the imagination. Okay, so let's continue because this takes me where I'm going. And there's Kinky. I don't know if I can allow you in the chat today because from what I understand, you might not have had your shot for monkeypox. And if you haven't had your monkeypox shot, we might not be able to deal with you. So Kinky, do you have your monkeypox shot or not? Make sure you know, because I understand the lockdown is coming for everybody that doesn't have their monkeypox shot, and I am doggone it enforcing that in the chat today. All right, so I don't want these anti-monkeypox vaxxers hanging around me, giving me monkeypox. All right, let's move on. Now, here's what I have to say. Let's talk about what it is that the Russians want. Because Maria Zakharova made a very, very good point. If you think that offering us, a bag of French fries and a couple of free appetizers at Applebee's is going to get this thing over with, you don't understand what's going on here. So let me start by saying this. I understand what's going on here. And I'm going to start with this, and then we'll go to how this thing started. What's going on here is this. Russia took their time to build up a very powerful military to be able to defend their border. In order for a country to be viable, it really needs three things, right? It needs to create its own energy. Russia can do that. It needs to grow its own food. Russia can do that. And it needs to be able to defend its borders. Russia can do that. Russia has taken the time up to do those three very, very important things. And I believe that Russia knew that this time was coming, that the time that they are in now was coming, and that they had a long-term plan. Russia and China, if you think about them, they think long-term. Russia's very conservative, and I mean the old school conservative, not the neoliberal conservative of the Republican Party today. I mean the old school conservatives, right? Which old school conservative was about what? It was about stability. It was about maintaining the customs and the culture that you had over the long term, being slow to change, to cherish your culture and cherish your the things that you've done and the ways that you've had your society for a long time, to cherish those, to try to keep them going strong, to make changes, small changes where you need to, not to be heavy on intervention outside of your own borders, to be able to protect your borders, not to go into debt to save your money. That's old school conservatism. That's not I'm not a conservative, don't get me wrong. In those ways, I am. I am, because that's about creating stability. Old school conservatism, unlike this neoliberal bullcrap that they call conservatism in the United States, old school conservatism was about international stability. It was about a stable country and a stable society and a stable relationships with other guys. So Putin is a very conservative guy, and it was a nationalist. But before we go any further, we got to define something about nationalism. Having traveled in some other countries, the Putin Russian style nationalism is very similar to an Iranian nationalism. And interestingly enough, having traveled around South America, the South American countries have a similar nationalism, unlike, again, this bullshit, crazy nationalism of the United States. Here's what I mean. It's a nationalism that says this: I love my country and you should love yours too, right? You see that in South America. You go to South America and you see these countries that, like, man, everywhere they love the colors and the history, and they know the history of their country and they love their country. You go to Venezuela, man, they love the Bolivarian Republic, as you call it. They love their country, their history, as they say, their democracy, right? They say we will die to protect our democracy, but they believe that other countries should love theirs too. We've got this, I don't know the word I'll use, this kind of national centric, ethnocentric, I don't know what you call it, kind of conservatism here that says, I'm going to love my country, and that means my country's better than yours, and yours is not as good as me. It's an empire. It's an imperialist a kind of nationalism. It's not a pure nationalism that says, I love my country and you should love yours. I love my country not to the exclusion of yours. Yours is great too, but I'm here in mine and I love mine. That's the kind of nationalism and conservatism that Putin has. And it's saying, I don't want to change when it comes to the whole stuff about trends and stuff like that. That's too new. They're conservative. They ain't into that stuff. You know what I mean? They ain't into legal weed. There's a basketball player who's like the 6'8" woman who goes to Russia, big mistake, and she brings one of these little, she brings a weed cartridge, right? And all this is going somewhere, and I'm going somewhere, and this is all about Russian NATO, so I don't think I'm not going anywhere. And she brings this weed thing, and there's a lot of countries you can get away with it, but as I said, I know a lot of Russians, around a lot of Russian people. I have a history of being mentored by someone who went to school in Russia. We got a lot of connections to Russia when it comes to that. So she got caught. Well, you know what? I was told by Russians, they were like, man, a friend of mine got caught with like a little teeny bit of weed and got 7 years. You're going to get 5, 6, 7 years there. So Brittany Grimes, Griner, or whatever her name is there. She should not. When you go to other countries, I mean, you got to watch those like shows that says I was in jail in another country. When you're traveling around the world, don't be bringing weed stuff with you. You're not in the United States, right? Like if you go to, I don't know, South Carolina here in the US or Texas, you ain't getting away with it. You ain't in Maryland, you're not in Virginia, you're not in Massachusetts, you're not in California, whatever. You go to one of these really red states, don't do it, because if you get caught, your ass is grass. And she went to a red country, and what I mean is it's a very conservative country. They ain't into legal weed. That's the breaks. That's the breaks. She's caught. I hope they find a way to get her out. But she might, if she goes through the normal system, she's gonna get like 5 years there. That's what they do. That's who they are. It's their country. We can agree with it or not. But again, it is a very conservative country in an old school nationalist, conventional, stable conservatism, right? Okay, so I'm going to go through all that to say, where are we going? Where are we going? To find out where we're going, we got to figure out where we started at, right? Well, when the war started, a lot of people said, well, the Russians Putin woke up on the wrong side of the bed. He wants to expand and become the new Soviet Union. This was unprovoked, blah, 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 blah. Let me go back for you. Let me go back. December 18th. On Tuesday, oh, well, I better share Moon of Alabama, and actually a very good site. So I'm going to share the article that I have, and this is back from the 14th, and this is going to tell you how we got here and where we're going. December 18th. Moon of Alabama writes, on Tuesday, I wrote about the serious security demands Russia is making towards the U.S. Russia feels the need to press the U.S. for new agreements because the current development of NATO sneaking into the Ukraine endangers Russia's pure security interests and would otherwise lead to a military confrontation. So what is he saying? Russia sneaking into Ukraine. Russia, the U.S. and NATO said that Ukraine was not going to become a member of NATO. But what Russia said is, what difference does it make? What you call them, you're filling them full of weapons, and we ain't going to have it. They're going to be a de facto member of NATO. No, that's on our border. Here's the way Russia saw it, why, and validly so. The United NATO is saying that they are a defensive organization, but we watched them attack Libya. We watched them attack Iraq. We watched them blow the crap out of Yugoslavia and Serbia. No, we watched them create Kosovo and say, that they can make the rules. So Russia said, you've come up to our border, you're encircling us, and now you're going into Ukraine, and you're going to turn Ukraine on our border into a Russian military, to a NATO military base, and we ain't going to have it. So what did they do? They did this document. And this is the 14th. Okay. On Wednesday, the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov met with the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State, presented her 2 draft treaties that Russia wants to see implemented, right? They were right. They were both published on the Russian Foreign Ministry. So let's go here. The first treaty would be between the U.S. and the Russian Federation, while the second would be Russia's and NATO. The reason they did that was, and they know the truth. They said, look, NATO's bullshit. NATO is Russia. The military of NATO, is the United States. The military of NATO is the United States. NATO is directed by the United States. It is no more than an umbrella organization that allows the United States to bring all of the countries in NATO under one umbrella, and then the U.S. can take power of attorney for the foreign policy for all of those countries. They knew it, right? So let's move on. So then it goes on, the draft detailed formalized demands, and they put them in writing. And what they said was, this is not a pick and choose. You've come to our border. You're turning NATO into a de facto, Ukraine into a de facto border state. And what they said was, failure to act on these, and we will be forced to take military/technical actions, right? And here's what he said. And he said, the statement includes the list of demands. So this is important. This is important. This is to understand for all of those people who said Putin just wants to expand the Soviet Union, whatever that means. Oh, it was unprovoked. There's a list of demands. Let's look at those demands. They gave a written list of demands and demanded something in writing. And the U.S. just gave them something that basically said, no, this is not a starting point. And if you remember, old Jens Stoltenberg said the Russians do not have a veto. They do not get a say in it. In other words, we're going to put bases on your border. We'll do anything you want. Fuck you. And the Russians were like, okay. And that wasn't wise because, again, if a country has the military wherewithal to enforce a demand, you can't really say to them, you have no veto or you have no say, because they're going to veto, and their veto is going to be with tanks and bombs and planes. They're just trying to give you their demand first. And second, if you don't take the carrot, here comes the stick. Okay, so let's look at their list of demands. Why do I say look at their demands? Yeah, Jimmy Dores, I was watching some of his show. It was excellent. Why do I say we need to look at Russia's demands? Because this video is about what happens next after Ukraine. Let's recall the Russians said, we're going to give you a list of demands, and they're not pick and choose. So what you need to do is look at these demands and say, after Russia is finished saying, let me add this. At one point, it was also reported that Emmanuel Macron was on the phone with Russia, and that Vladimir Putin said, my goals will be accomplished either through diplomacy or through arms. It was very clear. And they said, we have no place else to retreat. We have no further to back up. which also has to do. There was a famous that really goes back to a famous speech that was made by Stalin during World War II, when the Russians were losing a lot of stuff to we're losing a lot of city and a lot of territories to the Nazis, and their troops were falling back, and Stalin said, "No more." He says, "We have no more further to retreat. We're going to stand and fight." And they lost a lot of troops. Don't get me wrong, but they stood and fight, and they ended up turning the tide on the Nazis and pushing. Not only did they push them out of out of Russia, they pushed them all the way across Eastern Europe and all the way back, and they ended up in Berlin. As I say, when you attack Russia, the history says you attack Russia, they end up in your capital. So at any rate, let's go on. So what's his name? So Putin says they have no further to retreat, no further to retreat. And I'll say this. And Sergei Lavrov recently made a statement where one of the usual suspects in Europe said that they're going to defeat Russia on the battlefield. And Lavrov said, if you think you're going to defeat us on Russia on the battlefield, you haven't been studying history. Russia don't lose a lot on the battlefield. It's not their nature. They don't give up. They don't walk away. They keep coming. And they're not afraid of taking casualties. And their way of war is it's like their culture. They just keep coming and fighting and coming, and they ain't going to stop. And they wear you down, and they surround you, and they just keep coming. It's a classic old-fashioned kind of way of fighting war, and it's slow, and it's dirty, and it's painful, and it's bloody. And a lot of people don't like to do that. And that's the Russian way of war at any rate. And so you can do PR, but they're going to keep coming. And then, man, they don't mind fighting a bloody war. And I don't think the West is in for that. Anyway, so let's continue. So let's look at the demands, because here's my argument. My argument is that when the Ukraine crisis is over, the Russians had a list of demands, and they ain't going to walk away from that list. They're not going to say, okay, Ukraine's done, we're over. Let's look at this list. Number one, no more NATO expansion towards Russia's border. Listen to this. Retraction of the 2008 NATO invitation to Ukraine and Georgia. Well, I don't know about Ukraine, about Georgia, but they're going to make sure that NATO doesn't have to retract the invitation to Ukraine because they wouldn't listen to the Russians. The Russians are going to retract it themselves. Georgia, okay, and don't think they're going to bring that up. Next, legally binding guarantee that no strike systems which could target Moscow will be deployed in countries next to Russia. I suspect that the Russians, when this Ukraine thing is done, or when it gets to a point where the West says, hey, man, we want to talk, because let's face it, what happens if this goes to next winter? And with the price of gas, the price of fuel, Europe will be done. First of all, I don't think it can, because within months, Europe is crashing economically. They are crashing. They are being annihilated economically. Europe is going to be in tatters, and the people are going to be enraged. They're going to lose the taste for this. All those stinking blue and yellow flags hanging out their windows, they ain't going to be so happy with that. So at some point, NATO is going to deal with internal uprisings for sure, from the economic pain, from the ricochet effect of their sanctions. So let's go. Okay. I suspect legally binding guarantee that no strike systems which could target Moscow will be deployed in countries next to Russia. So I suspect at some point, whenever they start negotiating, and there will be a time that one of the Russians is going to say is, you see those missile batteries in Romania and in Poland, they got to go. They got to go. And if NATO says, well, you don't have a say, these are NATO countries, we will not remove them, I think we know how that movie ends, doesn't we? They're going to say, what did they say in Ukraine? Well, here's what we do. You could get the hell out of Ukraine, or we will take military technical action. The West said, screw you, Stoltenberg. Yeah, you have no veto. They're like, okay, well, fine. No, thanks. Okay, nice talking to you. And now they're going to do what they got to do. And the best the West can do is like these PR moves that try to convince their citizens that the Russians are losing. That's the best they can do. As Ukraine is getting dashed to bits, bit by bit, And remember, the Russians are doing what they said they were going to do. They're like, well, they didn't take Kiev. Russia's not there to destroy cities. They're there to destroy the army. They're not there to destroy the cities. They're not there to destroy the infrastructure. They're there to destroy the army. And that's what they're doing. They're there to destroy the military, everything military they can, to make sure that Ukraine can't put together a fighting force. That's what they're doing. They're there to crush the army. Okay. So next, at some point, either when they're negotiating the settlement for this, they ain't going to just say, "Hey, okay, we'll do this. You can have Donbass and Crimea. We're cool with that, and stop fighting." Russia's going to say, "We already got Donbass and Crimea. We don't need your permission for that. We took them. Remember, we tried to talk to you, wouldn't talk. So we did what we had to do, and we took whichever part of Ukraine we wanted to take. We took it." For all I know, they may continue to the Polish border. If they choose to do, that's what they're going to do. And if Poland or anybody else tries to stop them, they're going to fight them. The Russians, here's the way I see it. The Russians backed up to their border and they said, NATO has come all the way to our border, all the way to Ukraine. We backed up and now we're going to fight our way out of this. They feel like Russia's up to their border. I mean, NATO has come to their border and they're going to fight their way out of it. And if NATO wants to talk, they'll talk. If NATO wants to give them written guarantees, they'll take the written guarantees. But they're going to say, we told you what we wanted. If you can't give us those demands, then we fight. I think Russia is, you've backed us up. Our country cannot exist with you guys on our border with bases and missiles and all that stuff pointing to us. That means that sooner or later you're going to attack us. If we're going to fight, we will choose when to fight, and that's going to be now. So I think we're at a situation where the Russians are like this. We gave you our security demands. Either we're going to agree on those security demands in writing, or we're going to keep fighting until we've accomplished all of them. That includes, there's missile bases in Romania, there's missile bases in Poland. You will find hypersonic missiles in volleys coming in to every site that we said we don't want on our border. Every military installation that we said that we don't want our border will find hypersonic missiles flying into it, smashing it to bits. We don't care if you're ready to go to war. If NATO's going to come and fight, NATO's going to have to come and fight. But they have made a decision that they are not going to live with those things on their border. And if those things are on their border, here's what I mean. NATO's going to have to make a decision. Russia's saying, either you get off my border or we're going to fight you off. If you want war, then war it is. So NATO's going to have to make a decision. And the decision is going to be this. Either we acquiesce to NATO's demands and to Russia's demands and back up off their border. That's option one. They've said, and let's look at all of them and then we'll talk about it. No strike system which could target Moscow in countries next to Russia. No NATO or equivalent exercises near Russia's borders. NATO ships, planes, etc. to keep certain distance from Russian borders. Regular military to military talks. No intermediate range nukes in Europe. That's what Russia said. So here's the bottom line. Those are those demands. Russia has made their demands. So when the West wants to talk about Ukraine, Russia's going to say, great, but this ain't just about Ukraine. We gave you a list of our demands. Are you ready to talk about them yet? If your position is still, you don't have a say, we're not listening to you, then set them aside and we will continue this war. We're done with Ukraine. Now, we told you to get them damn missile batteries off of our, right? Here we go. Next, are you going to get them off? Yes or no? Yes, fine. Everything's fine. No, well, then I think we know what happens then. If you're ready for a fight, then we're going to fight. Next, are you ready to do that? Now, at some point, they're going to say, now you guys are having military exercises on our border. And we told you that we weren't going to allow military exercises on our border anymore, didn't we? If you don't stop these military exercises, the next one ain't going to be an exercise. The next time we see military exercises on our border, we're going to attack it and blast it to pieces with missiles. So it ain't going to be an exercise. See, so those things that what's coming next, in my opinion, I may be wrong. This is my thought. They have made a decision that NATO is not going to menace them on their border anymore. And they're putting a decision to NATO. If you want war with Russia, you can get it. Just keep doing those things and we will fight. We told you we're not putting it up with it anymore. If you don't want war with Russia, you're going to have to stop. But you can't have both. They're going to say to NATO, you can't have both. We told you what we're going to do. Now you do another military. We've told you as soon as that military exercise starts, we're shooting everything down. We're blasting every plane. Every ship is going to be filled with holes. So if you start that military exercise, it's war. You decide whether you want to start it. But if you start it, it ain't an exercise. It's war. What are you going to do? And that's what NATO's going to. And at that point, the European countries have to make a decision. They will actually have a decision to go to war or not to go to war. And here, that raises the question, is it that important to put bases on NATO, just to have bases on NATO's on Russia's border? Is it so important, Europe, that you're willing to go to war just to keep them there? Is it so important to do exercises on Russia's border that you're willing to go to war? That those aren't going to be exercises, they're going to be actual war. Is it that important for NATO? Is it war that NATO wants with Russia? And are they prepared for that kind of kinetic war against Russia? Because Russia has surely prepared for a kinetic war with NATO. So I think where we are is when they say NATO ships planes to keep a certain distance from Russia's borders. At some point when this is over, Russia's going to say, here's the distance we're giving you, X amount of kilometers. Anything within those kilometers will be targeted and attacked. It's up to you. You can come with those kilometers. Remember, I think they decided when a while back, the Brits sailed a ship within 12 miles of the Crimean coast, and the Russians buzzed it and they dropped bombs in the water around it, but they didn't attack it. Those days are gone. There's the demand. No NATO ships or planes to keep a certain distance from Russia's borders. Now, what Russia's going to be prepared to do, this is all my guess. What Russia's going to be prepared to do is say, look, let's work out the distance. You may say 100 kilometers, 300 kilometers, 500 kilometers, whatever. We're going to say a distance and we're fine. You stay out of that distance, you're okay. But if the West says we refuse to, you don't have a right to tell us what distance to come. NATO, I think Russia's going to say, okay, fine, we tried to talk to you. Russia's going to say, we tried to talk to you. So here's what we're going to do from now. This is the distance. Let's say it's 300 kilometers. Here's what you need to know. Anything that comes within that distances will be targeted and shot and attacked. If a ship comes within that, we ain't even going to warn them. You got missiles coming at it. We're going to sink them. If you bring some planes and you start doing exercise, any plane that comes inside of that's going to get shot down. That's up to you. We're ready for that. Are you ready for it? If you send a pilot inside of that, you just committed suicide for that pilot. He's dead and his plane's going down. And we're ready for that. Your decision. So NATO's going to have to make a decision. Do they encroach on Russia's borders and Russia's limits, knowing that the answer is a guaranteed war? I think that's the question. I think that's what we're looking at. It says, a typical example is Article 7 in the draft treaty between the U.S. and Russia. Here we go. The parties shall not militarily, I'll read part of it. The parties shall not train military and civilian personnel from non-nuclear countries to use nuclear weapons. The parties shall not conduct exercises or training for general purposes. That includes scenarios involving the use of nuclear weapons, right? So they're going on saying, officials also suggested, look, some NATO officials have already dismissed the Russian demands. Fortunately, none of them counts. Funnily, they made a similar argument as Russia. Okay. NATO sees the Ukraine as strategic depth that protects it from Russia, but it also wants to integrate Ukraine into NATO and thereby remove the strategic depth, right? So the bottom line is, you see, and they ended up by Jake Sullivan. It's very difficult to see agreements getting consummated, he added, if we continue to see an escalatory cycle. So the bottom line is this. The Russians were like, okay, we gave you an ultimatum. You didn't listen. So guess what's going to happen? You didn't listen. Okay. So I think what we can look at, and they end up by saying Russia has put its cards on the table. It is now for the U.S. to show that it accepts talks on an equal level to get real treaties. There will be a lot of resistance from the Republican side for Democratic president. The whole thing may have to wait for the next president to get it done. Still, it's a start and a good one too. The bottom line was this: when the Russians gave them those security demands back in December, they weren't waiting for the next president. They weren't waiting. The position of the Russians, I think, was this: you've come to our borders and things are getting dangerous, and we're not going to allow you to bring nukes and bring all this stuff to our borders and we're not going to wait until you turn Ukraine into a gigantic NATO, de facto NATO country. Now, here's the next thing. The U.S. said NATO's not a NATO, Ukraine's not a NATO country. Look at the amount of weapons they're giving Ukraine. Now, let me ask you this. The U.S. is literally paying the salaries of the Ukrainian government, of Ukrainian civil servants, of the Ukrainian military, paying the salaries. Part of that $40 billion is to pay the salaries of the employees. Every cop that walks up and down the street in Kiev, every trash person that takes trash away, every street sweeper, the United States is paying them. All of their government employees, Zelensky, the United States is now paying every dime of the salaries of the Ukrainian government. Can you say the Ukrainian government is not a, quote, NATO country? It's a United States colony, for God's sake. So the argument that Ukraine is not in NATO is now absurd. The United States is literally paying the salaries of NATO politicians and civil servants, paying the pensions of NATO, paying for healthcare for the citizens of NATO. Of Ukraine. Everything Ukraine is flat broke. It's out of money. The United States is now floating economically the country of Ukraine. So how can the United States argue that Ukraine is not a member of NATO? Has the United States ever gave a country that was a member of the NATO of NATO the kind of money and support it's given Ukraine? So clearly, Ukraine was a de facto, not just a member of NATO. It was the United States' #1 member of NATO, because the goal was to use Ukraine to go after Russia. And the Russians knew it. And the Russians said, okay, you've gone far enough. They put their hand out. You come any further than this, it's a fight. The United States, they said, here's a red line. The U.S. jumped over the red line and got punched. And now, as far as the Russians are concerned, whatever you're going to do, that's fine. And now think about this. Let me add this. There's another issue here. NATO really can't go to war with Russia. Let me explain why. Can the Germans go to war with Russia? Can the Poles, can all these other countries go to war with Russia? Let me explain to you why. They have made it clear. They have made it very, very clear. Most of Europe, all of Europe has made it clear. We can't really make it without Russian gas, right? 50%. Basically, the German trade unions, the German corporations have gone to the German government and said, listen, if you cut off Russian gas, it's over for our economy. Our industry will shut down. It'll never come back. Mercedes-Benz, it's over for them. BMW, see ya. Siemens, toast. The gigantic chemical companies, their history. One chemical company, I think BASF, 40,000 employees shut down. All gigantic industries all across Germany. Bosch, all across Germany, shut down. Continental Tires, I had Continental Tires one time, a pretty good tire, shut down, all done. I think they're toast anyway. But at any rate, right? If gas stops coming to Germany, Germany turns into a third world country. And since it is the economic engine of the EU turns into a shithole country. just a pile of garbage, a smoking pile of garbage. Why do I say that? Okay, there's a proxy war going on with Russia right now, and Russia has not turned off the gas. If it becomes a shooting war, right? And Germany and NATO is, if the Russians say, look, if you have a NATO, we told you that we're not going to allow NATO to have these exercises on our border. If you have these exercises on our border, we're attacking them and we're going to war. So NATO holds the exercise, and Russia attacks them. Boom, missiles everywhere, blow up tanks and all that stuff. And so now NATO says, oh, we're at war with Russia. Do you think Russia's going to keep pumping gas to Germany? How about oil? Anything? At that point, how about food? How about any metals? How about anything? At that point, Russia is at war. Do you think they're going to give their enemies the fuel? Do you think they're going to keep their enemies' industries going so the enemies can continue to build tanks and missiles in a war? So, in the event that they say, don't you do any more of these damn NATO exercises on our border, like they have demanded, and NATO does it, boom, and Russia attacks them, which they will. And now, at that point, bloop, the valves are off, and they ain't coming back on. The valves are shut off on Germany. What happens if it's next fall? And Germany now, the valves are shut off for gas. And they sell them uranium also for their nuclear power plants. So now, overnight, Russia has no gas. Their power plants are turned off. Their people have no lights. They have no jobs because their industry shut down. Their country turns into a dystopian hellscape overnight, along with the rest of Europe. So while Russia hasn't played the card that they could play, because they're wise businessmen and they know they want everybody around the world to say, the Russians, even when you're at friction with them, they're going to keep if they make a deal with you for gas and oil and stuff like that, they will keep their word. That's why Russia's keeping their word right now. But if they say to NATO, don't do this or we'll go to war, and NATO doesn't, and they attack, they're shutting that shit off. Now you are at war with them. You don't supply your enemy who's shooting at you. At that point, whoop, no gas. What happens if it's next fall? What happens if it's during the winter? What happens if it's September, October, and it's really starting to get cold in Europe? They're going to have enough problems as it is. By then, Europe is going to be catching hell from the price of food and everything. By then, Europe will be brought to its knees by fall, by these prices, brought to its knees. And then for Russia to say, okay, if this is a shooting war, if this is a hot war, you're not getting gas. You are not getting food. You are not getting anything. And Russia is, and NATO, the EU is highly dependent on Russia. So can the EU be involved in a war against Russia? It is suicide to do that, of course. And then, as they know, there's the possibility that it goes nuclear. So I think, first of all, it's economic suicide. At that point, the game's over. So we're already seeing cracks in the armor. We're already seeing Italy and Hungary. One of the big issues with the oil, von der Leyen and these people are saying we've got to cut off Russian oil, and Hungary is saying, well, okay, we get we're landlocked. We get our oil through pipelines from Russia. You guys get yours through ships. I tell you what we'll do. You can shut off ships as long as you keep the pipelines on. You dumbasses can do anything you want to. We're going to keep getting oil. So these countries, now I understand Poland has done away with their gas contract. 55% of their gas comes from Russia, right? Oh, Poland's going to, and they've gotten like $3 million. 3 million refugees. Poland's so done. Poland's going to fall apart. It is so going to fall apart. It's so, and I mean, it's got what they got coming. They got it coming. They did it. That's, they deserve it. They're going to get that. But at some point, I think Italy, I think Greece, and some of these other countries are waking up to say, we don't need this. I think France, the people there are going to, we can't afford to eat, and this ain't working. And what are you going to do? Go to war with these bastards just so the United States can keep encroaching on their borders? So that's the bottom line. I think at some point, those security demands. If you look at, as I said, I went into I'll show you the security demands, a list of the major security demands one more time. Okay, the major security demands that Russia asked for, right? No more NATO expansion towards Russia's borders, retraction of the 2008 NATO invitation to Ukraine and Georgia, legally binding guarantee that no strike systems which could target Moscow will be deployed in countries next to Russia, no NATO or equivalent exercises near Russia's border, NATO ships, planes to keep a certain distance from Russia's borders, regularly military to military talks, no intermediate range nukes in Europe. When the Ukraine issue comes to a head and they're in a situation where the Ukrainians have to, at some point, talk, when the West is saying we've got to negotiate with Russia, Russia's going to say, this ain't just about Ukraine. We gave you a list of them. We gave you a list. Let's go back to, if you want to end this, let's go back to our list. If you ain't going to go back to that list, we're not ending this. This is not about just Ukraine. This is about an entire list we gave you, and Ukraine was part of the list. If you want to deal with that list, we're ready. If not, we're moving to the next part of the list. And if you can't act on that, we're going to do the same damn thing. When we told you to get those damn missiles out of Romania and Poland, you will get them out, or we'll get them out. It's up to you. If you ain't going to get them out, then you better be ready to fight and protect them to keep them in, because we're coming for them. And we told you no more NATO exercises on our border. You have exercise on our border, it ain't going to be an exercise. Your decision. If you want to fight, we'll fight. But we're going to give you the option not to. I think that's where we are. I think that's the decision that Russia's made. And that's the way I see it. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Let's look in the chat and see. I certainly want to thank everybody over at Rockfin. Let me put the Rockfin. I always do this because I always ask everybody, A, to smash the like button, and B, to make sure that you have, if you're watching, that you also join my Rockfin channel, and that you're also a member, that you at least that you subscribe. You don't have to be a member. It's $9.99 to be a member. But if you are a member, that allows you to watch the premium content on anybody on Rockfin's premium content, not just mine. So that's the way I see it. It makes sense to me. When somebody gives you a list of demands, don't think that the first demand is the only one. Let's see. I did have some super chats, and I always want to get to my super chats. Let's talk about, Edward Bernay says, the NATO warmongering, money laundering Ponzi scheme will only end when U.S. military bases abroad become too expensive to sustain. This will happen when China demands its own currency for its exports, thus ending the U.S. dollar as world reserve. I think that's, you're on to something, Edward Bernay. How it's going to fall, I don't know. But I think Russia's decided. The U.S. is like, we want to confront China. They ain't done with Russia. Russia ain't done, my friends. Russia's not over this thing by any stretch of the imagination. I think I saw another one, and that was, how about this? Thanks for the super chats once again, you all. I really appreciate that. I've told everybody, when I get my website going, you can go to garlandnixon.com to check it out. So it should be shortly, at least let's say by June 1st at the latest. I want people, my friends here, my people in the chat, some of these people some of you all may be willing to write some articles and submit them to me, and I'll put them up on my website. Wouldn't that be awesome? There are rumors that Poland may invade, annex Western Ukraine for themselves. If this is true, then this is a risk a wider NATO-Russia war if they still have the right of Article 5. What do you think? Good question. Number one, let's not forget, Article 5 is not binding. Article 5 doesn't say that if a member of NATO is attacked, that everybody else has to come to their aid. It says they may consider it. If Poland goes into Ukraine, it ain't going to be with NATO. It's going to just be Poland going in on their own. They may get permission from NATO, but if they get attacked, then NATO's not coming to fight for them. And if they go into Ukraine and they don't get permission from the Russians, right, they will get smashed. Russia's already told them, we got some hypersonic missiles waiting for you if you come in. When Putin said NATO and Western powers better beware, if they get involved in the conflict, we'll strike them with lightning strikes that like they've never seen before. What that meant was hypersonic missiles. There's no defense from that. I don't care. You can come in and you can bring your S-300. You can bring your systems, your anti-missile systems. It doesn't matter. There's nothing that can stop hypersonic missiles. So if you come in there, we're going to hit your troops with hypersonic missiles with a salvo on them and blast the living hell out of them. And what are you going to do then? You're going to get wasted. So if Poland goes into Ukraine, they're taking a chance, because if the Russians don't want them there, they're going to pay. They're going to get that. Their troops are going to pay, and they'll have massive casualties. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you think the United States is going to go fight for Poland, you got another thing coming. The Poles is nothing but cannon fodder to them. They could care less about the Poles. So yes, that's very important. Anything else? I think that's it. Any more super chats? Great question. Great questions. I don't see any more super chats. And we will go. We do have a question, I think, on Rockfin, and that is biodigital. Read it above. Are there any cooler heads in the West with actual influence to make some sense? That's a great question. I think the fact that we saw an article in the the New York Times saying, "Whoa, we need to put pump on the brakes." I think the fact that we saw Henry Kissinger say, "You know what, we need to make a deal here." Now, what he was saying wasn't the deal, because just to say, let's give them some territory and that'll be it. No, the Russians in Ukraine, the Russians are taking their territory. The deal is going to have to be a deal for the security of their border. They are there for the security of their border, and they have now decided they will fight for the security of their border. And that's what they're going to do. And NATO, the US and Europe, has to decide, do they want war with Russia or not? Russia has made a decision. We're cleaning off our border. If it's war, it's war. If it ain't, it ain't. But you ain't standing on our border. That's what Russia's decided. You're not going to keep a bunch of military bases and missiles pointed at us on our border. If you think you're going to do that and not have a war, you are wrong. We're not going to say you can't keep them there, but you're going to have to fight to keep them there. That's the thing. And it's going to be a constant fight. The Russians are saying, we're going to continually fight to get them off. You're going to have to defend them in a war and continue to defend them to keep them there, because we're coming to blast them. So they're gone one way or the other. That's what we have. Justin Lips Watson says, I always look forward to your show. Keep up the great work. Thank you very much. So that's where we are. Great questions, everybody. Great questions. Any cooler heads in the West with actual influence? One of the things that I think is happening with the Kissinger thing, and let's not forget, at Davos, former Republican leader, what was his name? Eric Cantor was there. He worked for the big banks, and he was griping and complaining. What he said was, we made a big mistake in seizing Russians' assets. And he said, we're even hearing a number of our allies saying, we're concerned about keeping money in your banks. Perhaps you do the same thing to us. Eric Cantor sent the message. The banks are not happy. The money people are not happy. The money people feel as though the Biden administration has taken this thing too damn far. So I will say, there are very, very powerful people, it appears, that are getting real cold feet over this. And they're worried that they stand to lose everything, that there will be capital flight from the West. Now, there were reports that there was some meeting in China, the top China and the billionaires and the rich people in China, and that the government of China was telling a lot of wealthy people, you need to get your money the hell out of the West and do it quick. You need to divest from the West. You need to bring your money back to China. Not because they're forcing them to do it, but what they're saying is the U.S. is goading us into a war with Taiwan. They're pushing, and they're going to get it. But I mean, the U.S. is doing the same thing with Taiwan. They're doing with Ukraine. So China's saying they want us. They're going to do the same thing. So if your money's in the West, they're going to take it. So you better bring it home. I've heard a lot of wealthy people in Dubai doing the same thing. They're getting the money the hell out of the West. So what's happening? You're seeing these Western banks seeing capital flight. You're seeing Western probably having trouble in some of the major investments that they're saying, nah, we ain't investing in the West. China had like a $15 or $20 billion investment in Canada on oil fields and stuff. They closed it, they shut it down, they went home. They took their loss. Whatever we lost, it's over. Why? Because they know good and damn well that the U.S. is drawing them into a military confrontation. And if they get into a military confrontation, they don't want their money over there or their investments over there to be taken. So the United States the U.S. is creating an environment where people outside of the West don't want to invest in the West. And I think Eric Cantor was making the point, we in the banking industry ain't happy with that. They ain't working for us. So I think the Biden administration and the neocons are getting pushback from some powerful entities, and it's not going to get lighter. And as the as the economic, there was a poll. There was just a poll that I talked about today, covered today on the radio, and that was, there was a poll that it's above 50% now, the people who feel that the government should be more concerned with the economy than they should be with coming out with victorious in Ukraine. It's now 45% Ukraine and 51 or 52%, I think, um, be concerned with the economy. That number is going to keep going, trending in the direction of economics. The longer it gets bad, and gas prices are going to continue to rise. And as they do, people are going to be, you got to be shitting me, $7, $8, $9 a gallon. We want something done. Oh, when gas hits $8, $9, $10 a gallon, they're going to say, what the hell with Ukraine? Americans are going to say, to hell with Ukraine. You got to do something about this. And we have an inept group of hapless bunglers. Number one, they're neocons. They don't give a shit about Americans. They don't care about you. They don't care about domestic policy. These people are fascists. And the only thing they care about is their imperial warmongering designs. So they're going to have some real problems here. They're going to have some real uprisings and pushbacks that they ain't ready for. Right. Europe is, God knows that Europe's going to have problems. So time is on Russia's side. I'll put it like this. They're moving slow because this is the way they do war, but time is on their side. The longer this thing goes, the more the economic pain is going to come down on the leaders of European countries first and the US second. And the more people are going to say, we want a change. Now, keep in mind something. If these idiots push it to the point where China feels that they have to move on Taiwan, they're a number one trading partner. I don't think China would wait around. They've seen what happened with Ukraine. I don't think China would wait around for the US to sanction them. I think China already has plans. And I think China would say, we're sanctioning the US. I think China would say, okay, we are taking Taiwan, and effective immediately, we will not sell you any this, and this. You would go to the store, Walmart, they're all done. Nike, they're through. Apple, game over. I mean, just think what happens when all of these computer companies and phone companies and all of these companies in the US that get all of their parts, Samsung, all of these companies that get all of their parts in South Korea from China, and China says, we ain't selling you any of it anymore until such time as you make a deal with us for this, and this. So, and China may do that first. But at any rate, the time's going to come when China is going to say, we have the hammer on your economy and we'll use it. And imagine you're in the United States, your car breaks down, your lawnmower breaks down, and you're like, go to the shop. Hey, I need a part for that lawnmower. No, but my lawnmower won't run without it. And this is a $3,000 riding mower. I know, but we can't get the part. When? Ever. Throw that lawnmower in the trash. We can't get a part for it. It comes from China, and China has said they're not selling us anything. We're shut down in all technical parts. And then that's an electronic part for your lawnmower or your car. Nice car you got there, buddy. What do you got? Oh, I've got a nice hybrid Lexus. Yeah, beautiful. Too bad that part that you got comes from China. You might as well throw that Lexus in the trash because we can't get the part ever. China has stopped selling us. Oh, by the way, China took over Taiwan, and Taiwan manufactures all of the chips. And China said they don't sell the U.S. chips anymore until such time as we meet their demands. And what happens then? The United States falls apart. Everything we're buying, go to a Home Depot, everything there's electronic is made in China. The companies are buying their plastic. They're buying, you go to the store, everything you're buying is made in China. All that stops. Businesses shut down, everything shuts down, people can't get parts. A lot of the food we get comes from China. Clothes you got comes from China. Your world, your business shuts down, your life becomes a living hell. And that's what we're heading for, because China will bring the hammer down on us and say, until you come around and give us what we want, you get none of this. So the U.S. is setting itself up for a crash and disaster. And I think we're going to, if the pain of economics in Europe and the United States doesn't cause the level of uprisings, but I think it will, that forces our government and the European governments to acquiesce, to Russia, and at some point, because look, here's the bottom line: if they fail in this attack on Russia, this war on Russia that they have, if that fails, how are they going to drag anybody to fight China with them? If they lose this, which they're going to lose it, who are they going to drag to fight China with them? Nobody. The credibility is gone. It's game over. So that's where we are. That's about as far as I can go. Do we have any more super chats? I mean, let me look on. Oh, here's another one. Let's remember that it wasn't the people of Poland, Germany, etc. didn't ask for this. It was their evil governments. Absolutely, absolutely, and they're going to have to come after their governments. Although Poland, you know, they're rabid anti-Russia haters, but they ain't going to be happy because they got 3 million. They got 3 million Ukrainian refugees, and that's going to come back to haunt them. That's going to. How do you keep 3 million extra people in your country and feed them and house them and clothe them? How are you going to pull that one off for long? When in fact, the prices of everything is going through the roof, and people can't even afford to survive, and you got an extra 3 million people that you got to feed. They got problems, my friend, and they created their problems, and we will see. Thanks, everyone. Don't forget one more thing for those of you who can. I got a Patreon page, even if it's $1, if it's $3, if it's $5, whatever you can do a month, go to my Garland, patreon.com/Garland Nixon. I certainly appreciate that. Also, I appreciate the super chats. Anybody who's watching this on Rockfin anytime, any tip that you can give is much appreciated. At Garland Nixon on Twitter. I think I got 9 or 8 more days on Facebook before I'm out of Facebook jail, but I'll probably be right back in as soon as I say something about Nazis in Ukraine. So Garland Nixon on Facebook, Garland.Nixon on Instagram, garlandin@gmail.com, garlandnixon.com, or you can do Garland Nixon Show or the garlandnixonshow.com. That's my website. And I guess, this is important, my Telegram channel. Don't forget, you can just go to my Twitter. If you go to my Twitter and you look at my profile up top, you can click on my Telegram channel right there. So everybody, smash the like button. Become a subscriber on YouTube. Most importantly, become a subscriber on Rockfin. If you can do the $9.99 a month and become a member on Rockfin, I would appreciate that. And then you can see all my COVID stuff, because my COVID stuff is all premium, but you can watch everybody's premium stuff. You don't have to if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, if you don't have the money, please just enjoy my show the same as everybody else. And I appreciate you being on. Thank you very much. Have a nice night. Peace.